Why, hello. Yes, it's me, that guy who posts videos 3 weeks out of date, and yet somehow is putting out 2 videos in a row. Alright, cut me some slack. I am literally a high school teacher, and I think the wait was worth it because, oh boy, was this one interesting. We open up with Adar giving a rousing speech to the orcs, which seems to be a further attempt to humanize them. Yeah, good luck with that, guys. The orcs march to the tower and walk right up to the gate with absolutely no resistance, since apparently everyone has evacuated. Arondir then shoots a couple of them. Ah! Fire arrow. I should have known that they would put the cardinal sin of all fake medieval battles in here. So, this one arrow manages to make the entire tower collapse. How is that even possible? Was this thing really being held up by fragile wiring? I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here. Alright, so we see that the villagers have decided to move from a fortified holding down into a village. Why did they come here again? It's not like there's a huge supply of war materials here. If they were going to leave the tower, then they should have run, not gone back to the same place that was too vulnerable to defend at the beginning of the season. So, Adar and the orcs have complete and total control of the tower, which means that if there was anything tower-related that they needed or wanted to do here, then this would be the perfect time to do it. But since they don't do anything, I presume this means that there isn't some grander plan of Adar's that involves this tower. Huh. I wonder if I'm pointing that out because it will be important later. Anyway, in our next scene, we see that Isildur is having trouble sleeping, so he goes up to the main deck. Well, that's a waste of a good apple. Galadriel comes to him and tells him that she's been able to see the coastline for over an hour and he should be able to see it any minute. The two of them talk and Isildur mentions that he's a stable sweep and says that he joined because he couldn't stay there because the real Numenor is gone. Galadriel then says it's not gone, but that it exists even in the heart of the lowliest stable sweep. I'm so tired of the pretentious and yet still awful dialogue. We then see a sunrise and Isildur is absolutely awed. I guess he's never seen a sunrise on the open ocean before. He doesn't appear to be looking at the coast, which is barely visible. What, no morning drills in his sea guard training?
It's a full day's sail into the mountains, and from there, another day's ride east into the Vale.
Okay, well, so let's pretend that this is the actual layout of Mordor. It's not. First off, this river doesn't exist. And even if it did, I would be very suspicious of the notion that it would be able to support seaworthy ships. The Anduin certainly can, but that's because of the fact that the Anduin is a massive, virtually continental river that is both wide and deep. The same cannot be said for all its tributaries, especially when those tributaries are literally coming from a mountain. What, are they going to sail uphill? In actuality, they would have to get off either here or here, and then march through the practical jungle of pre-Gondor Ithilien, go over the pass of Curathungel, then ride south. That is going to take, at best, a week to get everyone and the horses over and down to where Ostirith is. Which reminds me, Galadriel's plot has likely taken weeks considering how far she had to swim, go through the storm, still drift through the ocean until Elendil picks her up, Elendil then having to sail back to Numenor, Galadriel having to spend at least a few weeks in Numenor considering the whole 10 days till departure thing, and then she had to sail from Numenor to Middle-earth, and that should take, I'll be really generous here, at least a few days. Let's give a conservative estimate that Galadriel's plot has taken about 4 weeks between her sailing from Lindon to now. Given the meteor, we know that Bronwyn and Arondir went to Hordern after Galadriel's departure. They check on the town, see that it's been destroyed by orcs. Arondir goes to investigate while Bronwyn goes back to her village to warn everyone. Arondir gets captured and Bronwyn goes to her house to fight the orc. They then go to the tower the next morning. We see Arondir imprisoned in the orc trench, the tragic death of Greg, and given the fact that basically no digging looks like it was done throughout the entirety of the episode, I'm gonna be really generous and say that Arondir wasn't in that trench for more than a couple of days. People continue to flood into Ostirith and food becomes an issue. So Theo goes to the village and waits there till night. Arondir then gets sent back to Ostirith and is next seen in the village rescuing Theo. So the long and the short of it is, unless Arondir was knocked out for a month, or these villagers had Harfoot levels of efficiency when it comes to going from point A to point B, this entire plotline should be over and done with weeks before the Numenoreans get there. In any case, we see Arondir try to destroy the sword hilt with a regular hammer, and of course it doesn't work. So he makes the very logical conclusion that there was nothing that they could do to destroy it. This almost reminds me of a SpongeBob episode. Bronwyn asks where he will hide it, and he says no one must know, not even you, but we then see that Theo is looking after him, which means that Theo is going to be stupid again. We see the villagers preparing the village for war by filling or blocking the tunnels and doing other stuff.
Our position gives us an advantage.
I'm sorry, what? No, it does not. The closest thing you guys have to a strategic advantage is a small bridge over a creek. And for some reason, unless the water melts the physical constitution of the orcs like acid, I highly doubt that it will prove to be much of a focal point. Honestly, what am I even watching here? There are like 50 people here and maybe 30 of them can fight. They're going to be fighting against a mass of orcs large enough to build this entire trench and tunnel system. These people have shown no knowledge of how to fight and have no command structure to deal with contingencies. Unless thousands of orcs died from that tower falling, the legions Adar mentioned last episode should easily be able to walk calmly across the bridge and leisurely climb at the people shooting arrows at them. So apparently this is their keep. I would have chosen something less flammable. You guys are going to huddle inside of that and the orcs are going to throw a single torch and burn the whole place down. These two then bury seeds and talk and then they kiss. I am not spending any more time talking about this past that. Not sure where the mountains went, but oh well. And so the battle begins. The orcs start coming in, and Bronwyn is so bad at using flint and steel that this orc has enough time to walk all the way over by himself, slash through a friend, and then of course, she has to steal his torch so that she can light the pitch. She lights the cart, and then it rolls down and causes everything to immediately burst into flame. They do it again, and that's when the archers start firing. Now, dear viewer, I want you all to imagine just how useful some crenellations, or an actual wall, or some distance, or maybe even a long, narrow ramp which would funnel all the orcs into your arrows up to a nice, strong wooden gate. Wouldn't that be wonderful to have in this situation? So this guy kicks down the open barricade, meaning that there ultimately wasn't even a point to the barricade. I think this might legitimately be the worst defense of anything that I've ever seen in my entire life. And I once watched a single hillbilly and his dog attempt to use a musket and a few toothpicks to defend a rotting outhouse against a swarm of angry hornets. So for some reason, the orcs all realize that they need to go to the tavern, because they've collectively figured out, without any indication whatsoever, that this was where the injured and children were being held. Then once they're up against the door, a bunch of people come out of the grass and charge the orcs. Arendir gets ambushed by a couple of orcs and falls to the ground. He kills this orc and then backs up into a massive orc who doesn't have a weapon for some reason. Okay. You know what? I'm just gonna let this one go. These two then engage in a 2-minute-long fist fight, much of which is spent watching the orc attempt to stab Arendir through the eye after he got stabbed through the eye. This orc's blood continuously pours out of its face without ever clotting or slowing down, and to be honest, it looks incredibly fake. Oh well, they only had $60 million an episode. Eventually, Bronwyn saves him by stabbing the orc through the throat. After this, it turns out that they won the battle, and I was begging that suddenly arrows would rain down from the sky and kill all of them. That would have been hilarious. Anyway, after briefly celebrating, they look around and find out, oh no, it was humans in the army, even though not a single shot so far displays this. I think pretty much every single soldier on the enemy side that we were shown was an orc with his face uncovered. They then all go, we were fighting our own. What? No, you weren't. These were traitors who swore to fight for the enemy last episode. Get this implicit racism out of here. Well, that's something, I guess. This dude gets shot twice, then Bronwyn gets shot through the shoulder, and so they all retreat to the tavern. Arendir and Theo attempt to help Bronwyn by stifling the blood flow, and they suck at it. Again, we have blood constantly pouring out of the wound like it's water, and what's worse, the close-up shows that it's already clotted. Anyway, they cauterize it and she does the thing where she has a sudden gasp of breath showing that she's still alive. The orcs then approach with a battering ram. Again, all Adar has to do at this point is burn it to the ground, but he insists on getting in the old-fashioned way, I suppose. We then see the Numenoreans galloping their way in the morning light. Now, considering the fact that the sun is rising behind them, they're obviously coming from the east, though to be honest, I don't expect whoever designed this shot to understand the idea of basic directional cues.
Is the sun coming up? Yes, sir. Then put it on the left.
Admittedly, it would have been nice to see them, unloading the ships, finding out what pass they're going to use, making their way over that pass. Just the basic aspects of any form of traveling. The stuff that even the Hobbit movies got right. Anyway, the orcs then get in, and Adar immediately starts questioning Arondir about where the sword is. I honestly have no idea why he thinks Arondir knows this, since it was Theo who had the sword when the orcs saw it. They speak to each other in Quenya again. I already talked about this, I'm not talking about it again. So Arondir tries to bargain, and naturally the orcs start killing the villagers. The orcs are about to kill Bronwyn when Theo reveals that he knows where it is and gives it to them. Adar goes out and tells John that he has a job for him. The Numenoreans then charge, and we are treated to the single most hilarious battle sequence that I have ever witnessed. So I know I said yesterday that I really couldn't explain what was wrong with the whole Halbrand and Galadriel scene unless I just simply read the dialogue. This is kind of similar, but it's even worse because, like, for one, I can't play the scene. I can't play the scenes with the battle, and so I'm not recommending that anyone get a Prime subscription. However, if you do have a Prime subscription, I would personally recommend going just to like episode 6, skipping to 38:45 or around there, and just watch it. Just watch the battle. It's so hilariously bad. I was howling with laughter when I first saw this scene until I was blue in the face. And honestly, I think it would just be disrespectful to your intelligence to try to explain what's wrong with it. It's self-evident. Anyway, Muriel tells Isildur to go, and he nods. We then see Elendil get knocked off of his horse by an orc, and then Isildur goes directly to him and calls to him, which means... Wait. Were these shots edited out of order or something? Galadriel asks Arondir where their commander is, and so he points to Adar. He tells her that he can't escape with that item, an item which I will henceforth be calling the thing wrapped in cloth, or twack for short. So we're going to pretend as if I didn't completely forget about the fact that it's the thing wrapped in cloth, and so it should be twick. She chases after him, and Halbrand grabs a spear. Epic chase scene. Galadriel slowly catches up, but it ultimately doesn't matter because Halbrand cuts them off in a manner that can only be described as somehow. Did Adar just go in a giant loop around the village? What was even the point of this chase sequence? Or, no, I understand. Halbrand found the teleportation that those elves from episode 1 used and attached it to his horse. Now it all makes sense. Halbrand trips the horse, and then Adar tries to crawl towards the twack. Halbrand stabs him through the hand and asks Adar if he remembers him.
Face is familiar. Have I threatened you before?
Galadriel prevents him from killing Adar, and in the next shot we see that they put all the orcs in chains. No, but I'll deal with that at some future point. Galadriel begins to interrogate Adar, and we find out what his true identity is. Apparently, Adar is one of the elves that Morgoth corrupted. Ah, now I get it. Adar is literally the father of these orcs, and that's why they keep calling him father. Boy, has he been busy.
The first orcs.
Uruk. We prefer Uruk.
That's just the black speech word for orc. Furthermore, why are you and the orcs using black speech? That was only invented by Sauron after his domination of Middle-earth, after the forging of the Rings of Power. Do these guys think it's some native orc language or something? In any case, Galadriel asks him where Sauron is, and he says nothing, so she threatens to torture the orcs by bringing them into sunlight. Adar then describes the motivations of Sauron fairly accurately, saying that he wanted to bring into order all the ruined lands of Middle-earth. He then continues, saying that he sought to craft a power, not of the flesh, but over flesh, but it didn't work. Eventually, Adar says that he was tired of Sauron killing all the orcs, and so he split him open. So does this guy just not know that Sauron can't be killed like that? Does this guy have no understanding of what the Valar and Maiar even are? Anyway, Adar then talks about how orc lives matter and how they're just as worthy of having a home as everyone else. Please ignore all the gutting and torturing that the orcs clearly relish. It's so interesting watching someone try to deal with the whole evil race thing that Tolkien himself struggled with, but utterly fail to understand the basic moral implications. Attempting to make the orcs sympathetic with the "we're people too" thing, while also showing how they are inherently violent and relish the deaths of others, well, let's just say it doesn't really solve the problem, and might actually make it worse, honestly. Galadriel says that she'll kill every single orc alive and leave Adar left so that he knows his kind dies with him. Adar then says, "It seems I'm not the only elf who's been transformed by the darkness," and tells her to look in the mirror. So she almost kills him, but thankfully Halbrand comes in at that exact moment and stops her. Well, that's lucky. Galadriel and Halbrand talk for a bit and we get more shipping material, but otherwise, as with everything else in this episode, nothing important is said. Halbrand is called back to the village and we see everyone feasting and celebrating. I guess it was the Numenoreans that brought all that food? Are they sure they want to do that? It's a long trek back to the sea, although knowing these guys it won't take more than about 3 minutes. Muriel introduces Halbrand to Bronwyn and reveals that he's the king. Then the entire village proclaims him king of 40 people. I don't know, guys. I think we should start with the more appropriate title of mayor. Don't worry, I'm sure we can work our way up from there. Galadriel then gives Arondir the twack, and then he goes and talks to Theo. Theo talks about how sad he is that he won't be able to use the sword again, and Arondir tells him that the best way to truly be rid of it is to give it to the Numenoreans so that they can throw it into the ocean. It is then that Theo is the first person who has the bright idea of opening up the cloth, and we see that it is just a hatchet. Apparently no one else thought to maybe look at the thing that Adar was so desperately trying to take away from the village. Really? We then cut to John, who has thoroughly stabbed himself in the arm with a sword and caused the thing to generate fully for the first time. He then uses it as a literal key to insert into this spot right here. He turns the spinny spin thingy and causes the dam next to the tower to open, which makes the entire reservoir flood out into a tunnel. So, just in case none of you have figured out what's going on here, it turns out that the orcs have been digging those tunnels and trenches not because they're attempting to cover up the sun or for whatever other military reason, but because they're attempting to redirect the water from the reservoir to Orodruin to make it erupt. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. Where do we even start? Okay, so let's start with the positives. This kind of, but not really, explains why the orcs were building a large trench rather than continuing to build tunnels for everything. I do remember asking in my episode 3 review what the purpose of making an open trench was, and then covering it with tarps rather than just putting tarps over an open road. So yeah, I guess that sort of makes more sense. And, I think that's it. Apparently the sword was designed as a key, specifically for the purpose of opening up the reservoir. Why? Arondir says last episode that it was designed for the enslavement of the people of the Southlands. How does opening up a water reservoir fulfill this purpose at all? Are we to assume that the orcs have been digging this trench for hundreds if not thousands of years, going back to whenever this sword was created? That this was Sauron or Morgoth's original plan? And if that was the actual plan, then guess what? You didn't need that sword to pull it off. Remember how these villagers basically surrendered the tower to you at the beginning of the episode? Here's an idea. Build a catapult and break the dam, or throw rocks at it until it chips the top off. However, on a more practical level, these tunnels would not be able to transfer the water all the way up to Mount Doom. We see that the water bursts from the openings of the tunnels all throughout the village, meaning that it is indeed flowing far too quickly to be contained by them. As such, a significant portion of it would wash over the sides of the trench or simply be absorbed into the ground. This isn't like an aqueduct which is made of smooth, declining stone stretched over the course of miles. This is dirt with tree roots and branching paths as well as underground pools. This water would either mostly leave the tunnels or stop before it reached Orodruin. But even assuming that the water could mostly reach Orodruin, how on earth did it get down into the magma chamber? You can see that light is still coming in. How is that even supposed to be possible? Do these people not know that magma chambers are usually far beneath the earth? But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the water was able to flow all the way down into the magma chamber. This still would not create the eruption that we see in this episode. So the fundamental idea here is that the water would immediately vaporize or dissolve into the magma, which would then cause a massive gaseous expansion in a very short amount of time. Gas takes up far more space than liquid or solid, and so the force of the expansion would cause pressure to build up until it has the force to break through the rock. This is actually a type of volcanic eruption. They're called phreatic eruptions. This is what they look like. And that's it. There is no reason for this to cause flaming rocks to rain down from the heavens, or for a pyroclastic surge to travel across the valley, let alone for this to cause the sun to be blocked out from the constant ash pouring forth from it for hundreds of years. I'm some random guy on the internet. These basic mistakes shouldn't even be getting to me. They apparently consulted a geologist on this point, but for some reason they decided not to listen to anything he actually said. I imagine the conversation went something like this. Hi, we were wondering, could water cause a volcanic eruption? Well, yes, there's a specific type of eruption. Okay, thanks, bye. But even if we were to accept that this would be the type of eruption that would happen in this situation, the eruption still wouldn't happen, because the orcs dug a massive hole which would let out all the buildup of the pressure. I don't know if you guys know this, but air and water are generally less difficult to break through than solid rock. Why then did the eruption happen out of the top of the mountain rather than where the water is coming from? And you know what's the most frustrating thing about this? They could have made everything make sense. All they needed to do was say that if you complete the full sword and do something like stab through a guy's heart with it, it causes the mountain to erupt. It literally would have made sense if they had just said it's magic. In any case, Aradruin erupts, which catapults flaming rocks in every which way, landing with such precision as to wipe out individual men standing in the village. A pyroclastic surge washes over the entire landscape, as Galadriel simply watches everything happen. We see in a brief shot that Adar has escaped, and the episode ends with the entire village being consumed by the ash. I have no idea how this eruption could have even affected the people in this village. Ostirith is over 100 miles away. I'm not even sure it's physically possible for a pyroclastic surge to make it that far. With that in mind, however, the pyroclastic surge does indeed make it to the village, and I must comment that everyone is dead, including, but not limited to, Galadriel, the orcs, and Adar as well. Unless he found one of the teleporters. Now that I think about it, why didn't they just teleport away? It's almost like they're only allowed to use it when the camera isn't on them, and otherwise they just have to pretend that it doesn't exist. In any case, as I was saying, everyone's dead, including Galadriel. In fact, Galadriel is more dead than when she tried swimming the ocean. This pyroclastic surge really should not have made it all the way here. But if we're going to say that it does make it to the village, then the entire valley should be completely fried in burning ash. What do the writers think happened to Pompeii? They didn't die from prolonged suffocation after being buried. They died almost immediately from the ash literally melting away their flesh and burning them down to the bone. Alright, so we're done with that one. What a farcical train wreck of an episode. Everything, from the flow of events to the choreography to the battle plans, all look like they were conceived by a teenager doing his first D&D campaign. The orc tunnels have gone from something which at least somewhat made sense in their own context, as a way for the orcs to shield themselves from the sun as well as remain covert, to something which makes absolutely no sense the moment you think about it. This episode severely suffers from prequel syndrome, where the writers feel the need to explain everything that you see in the original by giving it some origin story. Thus, Mount Doom is no longer a demonstration or manifestation of Sauron's power as a Maya in a land which he has so thoroughly invested himself in. Instead, it's a continuously active volcano which produces enough ash to black out the sun because some guy poured enough water into it thousands of years ago. Mordor isn't destitute and ruined because of thousands of years of reckless use of the land from industrialism and failing to restrain the destructive tendencies of the orcs. Instead, it was the massive pyroclastic surge from the volcano, which isn't allowing anything to grow back because it's blocking out the sun. But even ignoring the ending, the rest of the episode was really dumb. And believe it or not, I'm actually getting tired of using that word, but I can't find an adjective more befitting the childish nonsense I am forced to endure. The action is contained to a skirmish between dozens of men and orcs, and yet the episode is framed as if the fate of the world hangs in the balance. It ends with the capturing of this show's show's only antagonist so far, and then the proclamation of the return of the true king. It pretends as if this is Helm's Deep or the Blackwater or New York from the Avengers, when it's at most a skirmish. I suppose it's theoretically possible that this was meant to be viewed as a small thing, but the episode simply isn't framed that way, and nothing seems to indicate that other than the factual amount of people present. You might have noticed how I seem to skim through most of the episode, and that's because the battle honestly doesn't matter. If Adar had just not been dumb and broken the dam, the same thing would have happened. If he had just burned down the tavern in the village instead of wasting time with the initial demoralization assault, the same thing would have happened. If the Numenoreans hadn't shown up, the same thing would have happened. The stakes of the episode as a whole were so low in my mind, because we know that however the battle ended, it ultimately didn't matter. We know that the Southlands turn into Mordor in the Second Age, so regardless of whether Adar was Sauron, and regardless of whether he wins, the same result would always have happened. At best, it delays it to next season. Thus, I kept thinking after the episode, what was even the point of all this? And finally, I wanted to ask, how on earth did the Numenoreans get here? This appears to be the first real Numenorean venture to Middle-earth, but even if we were to then ignore the question of how they got these maps, what on God's green earth convinced them that they would be able to sail towards the mountains, and that the rest would only be a day's ride east of there? Even Faramir doesn't know of other ways into Mordor besides the Morannon or Cirith Ungol. How did these guys figure it out? And if you want to say that Halbrand told them about it, then I have the same question. How on earth did Halbrand figure it out? And if they did take the pass of Cirith Ungol, then I'd love to see how they completely avoided Shelob. And yes, she was almost certainly there by this time period. And I wouldn't even have as much of a problem with this if they simply showed us their route, or showed them traveling, rather than vaguely mentioning it at the beginning of the episode, and then implying that their horses galloped for hundreds of miles. I will give this episode one thing, though. This was by far the single most entertaining one this entire season. I was in so constant a state of laughter that I felt my face turn blue by the halfway point. I've never seen a show so desperately want to be taken seriously, while showing characters slide to the side of their horse as a means of dodging arrows and javelins, implying that an army of horses galloped for leagues upon leagues over a mountain pass, and indulging in a fistfight for almost the entirety of a military engagement. Unfortunately, I fear the last two episodes will not be anywhere near as enjoyable to watch or make fun of. Well, more's the pity. But at the least we only have a little bit more to go. I guess I'll see you guys next week for another round of raw sewage served fresh by our corporate overlords.